And so we just, figured out how to do that better than they were doing it in Germany. And within 6 months, our yields exceeded Germany's, and our quality ratings exceeded Germany's, which really pissed them off.
So hello, Randal Chinnock. Thank you for being on this edition of the Odd Engineer podcast. I'm Erin.
I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited. People don't even know what they're in for. You've done a lot of things, but your main claim to fame is that you built a very successful optical medical device development company. You also are working on, you're founder-director of Southbridge Tech Incubator, and you are a competent engineer yourself. You don't just run these organizations. So you have so much awesome knowledge from both ends of the business side of things and engineering side. It's like people don't even understand what they're about to hear.
Hopefully I can make it clear.
So I want to learn about everything. I want to hear about, your optics and engineering knowledge, and also the business side of stuff, because there are engineers who are listening who might want to go into freelancing and they need help on understanding the business aspect too. But
right.
Let's go into your way back in the back machine, because I like to look at people's undergrad degrees. And I was just talking to Julius Buzevec, who is an optical scientist. He's an illumination engineer. And he says, no, I'm a physicist. He doesn't consider himself an engineer, he's a physicist. And you also have a degree in engineering physics. Are you a physicist or an engineer?
I'm a little bit of both. Engineering physics is like an engineering degree, ME or EE, but with less of a concentration in one specific engineering area and more of a concentration in the physics that underlie all of those areas. Mm-hmm. So while I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm not a mechanical engineer, I know the theories underlying those disciplines, and I've managed engineers in those disciplines so many years at a certain competence.
Right. I have an applied physics degree, so I kind of have a similar, bird's eye view of that understanding, and I found it really helpful in, system engineering and understanding how all the pieces fit together.
Exactly. It is really the ideal background for being a systems engineer or a complex program manager.
Or a CEO, I guess.
or a CEO if you're interested in the business side of things and the sales and the marketing and the risk.
All right. So how did you get from studying engineering, physics, and also for a bit you were studying material science and mechanical stuff?
Yes, I started out at Johns Hopkins studying mechanics and material science, and I've always loved material science, always fascinated by it. But I was restless. I left there and went walkabout for a year, and then I ended up at the University of Colorado, where I switched to engineering physics and finished that up, graduated that in '78. And I got recruited right out of CU by a company in California that was producing vacuum tubes, great big vacuum tubes, not the little glass ones that were in the back of your old radio or TV, but things that are you can barely get your arms around, that are used in radio transmitters and all kinds of very high-powered radio frequency applications.
Wow, I didn't know they made them that big. That's wild.
They do. Yeah, they're huge. They have powers up to 1 megawatt.
Do they still make them?
So they do. In fact, some of those biggest tubes are still used by the Voice of America, that is broadcasts American programming all around the world. Some people call it propaganda, and they're not limited to the 100,000 watt radiating power in the U.S. that radio stations can have. So they go up to 250,000 watts or more, and it's very difficult for countries to jam a signal that's that powerful.
Oh, interesting. Wow. So how long were you there for? What were you doing there?
I was hired as a production engineer, so I was on the factory floor, attending to how the product was being manufactured from an engineering perspective. When there were problems, low yields, for example, on a particular process, I would dig into that process and understand why are the yields low, and it might entail retraining someone or recalibrating something or developing a better fixture for holding things while they're being grazed together, for example.
Wow, that's such a great starting point for anything you want to do in manufacturing going forward. Not a lot of engineers who design things really understand what it's like to build that on an assembly line, but you did right out
Well,
the
that's
gate.
right. Absolutely. And I think every design engineer ought to spend a few years in manufacturing, either up front or early in their career, so they have a clue how things are made after they've designed them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. So, did you get restless and you left there again?
Was in that role for about 18 months, I think, and the company was that technology was actually spun out to another company, and so the technology and several of us engineers and managers all went with the technology over to this other company in Sunnyvale, California, and then they had a different role available for me. It was applications engineer. So this was working with customers to develop custom products or variations of products that we already made.
Okay.
And so that involved a lot of customer interface and traveling all around the country. And I love that. And, I have an outgoing personality, so I like the customer interface. And that was really the beginning of my whole career arc of dealing directly with customers and eventually starting my own business.
Wow. And then what?
So then that company wanted to start up a subsidiary in Puerto Rico to manage these things called optical encoders. They're little electro-optical assemblies. And this was in the 80s, early 80s, when Puerto Rico still had all these tax advantages for mainland companies to set up businesses there, manufacturing especially. And so I went down and I found a building to lease and brought in all the equipment that we needed, hired a team, and we started manufacturing optical encoders. And that was one of the best jobs I've ever had, because those people were the hardest working people. There was 20% unemployment on the island, and every single one of those people was really glad to have a job, a good job. We paid prevailing rates, and I'm a very inclusive manager, so I didn't micromanage people. People had a lot of autonomy to do their jobs the best way they knew how.
So you basically built a factory in Puerto Rico. And it was
That's right.
Nothing to you. That's huge.
Yeah, it was great. It was really fun. And
how old were you?
But after I was 27, I think.
Oh, okay.
And but unfortunately, our main customer at the time was a manufacturer of daisy wheel printers, if you remember those.
Oh, I know.
And no, they only lasted a few years because dot matrix printers came along and really obsoleted the technology. And so the demand for our manufacturing capacity dried up, and I spent half a year trying to find new customers to fill our capacity and so on, but that was unsuccessful. So ultimately, I ended up leaving and found myself in Massachusetts just because my brother lived there, and that was kind of a place to land back in the States, back in the mainland. And so I ended up at a company quite quickly called Dolan Jenner Industries, and they make all kinds of electro-optical components, mostly oriented towards industrial safety. So, for example, infrared curtains that were in front of a punch press, so that if the operator had to slide a big piece of sheet metal into the punch press, and the thing would act as a safety, the punch press would not come down unless there was nothing breaking the infrared curtain, like his hands. so all kinds of electro-optical products like that, and they had a unique fiber optic technology that they wanted to turn into an imaging device, and that was one of the things that I focused on. I was general manager of manufacturing and also head of R&D there, and that was a product that we worked on for about 12 months and got that into production.
That's some cutting-edge stuff back then. That was
It was.
In the 80s, right?
That was in the 80s, yep, still 82, that was 83, 84-ish, and that company, I lasted there about a year and a half. The owner, president, now deceased, he was a scrappy businessman, old school, Boston Irish, hard drinking, hard smoking, but a bit of a tyrant, and I didn't take well to that. So after a year and a half, I found a job at a company called Dionex, which was a division of Smith & Nephew, which is a big London-based medical device company. And they had bought this company, Dionex, that was in Andover, Mass, that specialized in instrumentation for arthroscopy, joint surgery, minimally invasive joint surgery. And they had a line of endoscopes, arthroscopes in particular, that were used for those procedures. And they had fiber optic illuminators, basically arc lamps in a box that would illuminate a fiber optic cable that would attach to the scope that would bring light inside the joint. And then they had video cameras and recorders and monitors and all the stuff so you could do, you had a complete medical video system. And so I was brought in.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you ask it.
Was this your first foray then into the medical field, medical devices then?
It was, actually. Well, not exactly. Back in my first couple of jobs, we also manufactured arc lamps that were used in all of the fiber optic illuminators in the world for medical. And that's part of the product line that went on when that product line was sold. And so that actually, when I was an applications engineer there, my customers included all of the flexible endoscope companies that dominated the market. That was Olympus, Fujinon, Pentax, and Storz. And so we made fiber optic illuminators for all those companies. They're all different, but use the same technology.
Wow. It's amazing that all that stuff existed back then.
Well, that's right. And when I landed at Smith & Nephew, in fact, they were using that illuminator technology from ILC technology. And so it was very familiar to me, and that's one of the reasons they hired me. But this was the first time that I got into imaging optics, and I had never really studied that, so I had to learn that by doing, and that was a great growth opportunity to learn how to design endoscopes and optimize the design of video cameras, figure out how you're going to get adequate light with adequate uniformity into the scene that you're imaging with the endoscope. And this is a lesson learned, actually. I've done scores of endoscope development projects over the years. And one thing that customers don't pay enough attention to is they're always focused on image quality. I want the best image sensor, I want the best monitor, camera, all that stuff. But they forget about the illumination side. And illumination is just as important.
Yeah, especially in tiny, cramped, small spaces like surgery would give you.
That's right. Yeah, you have to have the right wavelengths, you have to have the right distribution, the stability, and the overall brightness to support the frame rates that you want, so forth.
Wow. So on the imaging side, on the imaging and non-imaging side, what were you using to design that stuff?
We were still using Code 5 back then. The guy who, I was hired in as product development manager for the visualization product line. And the guy who had that job before me, a guy named Dennis Weiner, who's still in the business, he became a consultant. And so he's a PhD optical engineer. And so he would work as a consultant to our group to do the hardcore optical design work. And he was running Code 5 at the time, then he went on to ZMAX at a later time. So he could design endoscopes, camera couplers, illumination optics, and so forth.
Wow. Why did?
And so
Do you know why he
I would learn.
switched to ZMAX?
What? I'm sorry. Say it again.
Do you know why he switched to ZMAX?
I would say it was probably the late '80s, somewhere around there, early '90s.
No, why?
Oh, why?
Yeah.
Cost. Code 5 is very expensive to run.
Yeah. Okay.
And Code 5 is extremely capable, and they've continued to improve it over the decades. But for a small company, it's very expensive to run.
Right. Wow. So were you mostly overseeing, but you learned how to design them, even though you had.
I learned how to specify and manage the development of an optical system. I never became a ZMAX jockey because I was more of a manager even back in the day, and so I would have to learn enough about it to understand how complex it was, understand the process, how long it would take, and establish a reasonable budget for a product development process like that.
Interesting. You know, that's a strong contrast to how a lot of product development companies in, like Silicon Valley are handled now, because a lot of the, like software development teams are transitioning into making hardware now, and they're building them the same way. So I was really shocked when I went to interview for a project management role at Apple, and they were like, that's really great. You got flying colors passed by our optics guy on your optical knowledge, but we don't care about any of that because we just want to know if you know how to make a Gantt chart. Like, their abilities for actually understanding and guiding the engineering work is non-existent. It really shocked me, actually. And because that's how software is developed. You'll have a project manager who knows nothing about coding, but they're the ones who, like, keep the people in line and, help encourage them and push them along and make sure all the horses are running in the same direction.
I'm surprised that they didn't have that expertise. Maybe it was, maybe they had that expertise in some other group within Apple because, they make great cameras or they incorporate great cameras into their products. So somebody in Apple needs to understand that.
Oh, they absolutely do. Like, the engineering team will have engineering leaders who are very, 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 competent in what they're doing. But the project managers are it's really just project management, period. That's all they do.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So you kind of minimize, like your knowledge there a little bit because you're not, I'm not actually designing it, but that's still far more than a lot of companies are doing it now. And I think I'm surprised that Apple makes anything at all with having, project managers who are the ones who are supposed to help fix problems when they pop up, and they don't even know. They wouldn't be able to suggest anything. So
this is the trend now in a lot of companies is to hire product managers who have their PMPs, project management process certificate, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And there's all different types of certificates you can get. But
so many acronyms.
And that teaches them how to run MS Project or some other project management software. Right. And they know how to optimize schedule and resources and critical path and all those things. But when you lack the knowledge of product development and manufacturing, then you're really missing a key component in project management. And I've had the unfortunate experience of having customers who insist on inserting their program manager into our process, and it was enormously frustrating.
Wow, because they didn't understand what you're trying to do on a technical level.
That's right, and they didn't understand the reasonableness. They were box checkers. They said, well, this is our process for program management. We do this, and then we do that, and then we do this, and we would say, well, you can't do step 1 because we haven't demonstrated step 4. Well, that's not how we do it.
Oh my goodness. So in this role where you were, leading the product development, and you still had to gain enough understanding of how it's done, how it's designed, how it's engineered.
That's right.
What kind of work was involved in that then? You mostly just checking things as they went
There was,
along and then jumped in when
yeah,
there was a problem?
yeah, OJT, on the job training. That's how I've learned most of what I know, you know. Having the degree in engineering physics gave me the theory and to understand almost everything that I needed to learn later in my career, at least on the technical side of things. And so I would learn from the MEs and EEs and OEs and ChemEs in the group, and learn enough about what they do to be able to effectively manage them, to be able to come up with budgets, and I would also learn from managers above me, which would be like director of R&D, VP of R&D, about how to ask critical questions of your team to reveal whether they are really 80% done with the task when they say they are.
You got any tricks you can share with us on that one?
Well, sometimes you just have to dig a little bit deeper. And, okay, so you say you're 80%, so what remains on the task? And they would name 3 things. Right. I said, okay, so the things that you've already completed, are those 100% done? Well, no, I haven't finished all the documentation on that, but the design's done. Say, well, so really, that part is of that task is only 80%. So how can you say overall you're 80%? Well, maybe you're right. It's 70%. So that sort of conversation.
I see. Great example. So that sounds like fun, but you didn't stay there forever. What happened?
I stayed there for 4 years.
That's a long time for you.
It was. That was the longest stint I'd had as an employee of somebody else's company. And that whole time, we had a key supplier. The company that actually manufactured our rigid endoscopes was a company called Henke Sass Wolf, and they're located in Germany, in the town of Tuttlingen, which is actually a city of 50,000 people and 500 medical device companies.
Wow.
So it's a real cluster. That's where Karl Storz is located, the headquarters, a huge company, and Escalop and some of the other big German firms in the device world. And so I managed the relationship with them and went to Tuttlingen probably 20 times and had meetings with their engineers and went through the product development process with them on, 10 times around with different products. And they decided that, and so I really, had good rapport with them. And they decided they wanted to set up a U.S. subsidiary. And so I raised my hand. And
you're like, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. And they knew that. And of course I knew their product line, I knew their people, and I knew their biggest customer. And so I gave my notice, 1 month notice, and my boss was not happy, but, what could he do? But the strangest thing was, the folks from Henke came in on a Friday to do some business, and I was still wearing my Smith & Nephew hat. And we resumed on Monday, and I was wearing a Henke hat. And that was really hard.
Oh.
I kept saying you when I should have said us, and vice versa.
That is wild. That brings up a good point that I want listeners to take note of, is that, some of the best positions that are out there are never going to be on a job board. They're never going to make it that far.
That's right. It's being there.
And personal relationships that you build because the cooler the job, the more someone's probably going to want someone to say trust in that job. And you can't really build trust in a 30-minute interview.
Well, that's right. And the way companies use job boards now, and Glassdoor and all those places, it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's cool. So were you still having to travel back and forth to Germany then in your new role?
Yes. Yeah, even more often. I would go to Germany, but it was a replay of Puerto Rico. I found a building for lease, and actually conducted a national survey. I had actually built the business plan in my spare time while I was still at Smith and Nephew. So I'd go home at night. I'd build a business plan for Henke South Wolf of America, and part of that was doing a national search on where to locate based on labor rates and workforce availability and unionization and transportation considerations, where the key customers would be located.
I mean, this is like a startup you were building, not just a subsidiary. This is like a brand new company.
It was. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But, there were certain things that were already in place, like the account system, and, the product itself was already established. So it was more about facilities and locating and sales and marketing and team building.
And so there weren't any employees at all there, right? You were the only one at the start?
Right. So for several months while I was still at Smith and Nephew, I built the business plan, but it was only after I transitioned into the role at Henke that I started executing the plan. And at that point, they had already decided that one of the locations that I had selected was best for them, and that was Southbridge, Massachusetts. It was about an hour away from Smith and Nephew, which was a good distance, close but not too close. And there was an optical cluster of companies in Southbridge because the largest optical company in the U.S. for almost 150 years was located there, American Optical. And what really cinched the deal for them was that their competitor, Carl Storz, Endovision, was located in the next town. And Germans like to cluster. They like to cluster their businesses because it results in a critical infrastructure of suppliers in the area and educated workforce. And they steal each other's employees, and these employees build up knowledge that's useful to both companies.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So they go in expecting to have their employees stolen and steal from the other companies.
And vice versa. Right. And that happened. And so it would force you to create a really good working environment, especially compared to the other German company.
Competition.
Yeah.
Neat.
So it was a replay of Frederico where I found a building to lease, started ordering in and setting up all the equipment we needed. First guy I hired was a production supervisor, and we wrote out the job descriptions for the workers, and he started hiring workers, and we renovated the building, and we then started bringing in all the inventory that we needed from Germany. We started out as a repair operation, so it was we had to learn the repair process that already existed in Germany. So we would hire talented technicians, and they would then get sent over to Germany to stay for like 2 weeks to learn at least part of the process, not the whole process necessarily. And then they come back, and they might go over again later for more training. And then we started improving the process ourselves, especially from a just-in-time perspective, Kanban kinds of principles, and lean, and we implement a lot of that stuff. Not that we went to courses for all that, it was just common sense stuff. How can you make this run smoother? How can you make sure you don't run out of parts? How can you keep track of the parts that are being used so you understand, so you can forecast how many you're going to need going forward and so forth? And so we just, figured out how to do that better than they were doing it in Germany. And within 6 months, our yields exceeded Germany's, and our quality ratings exceeded Germany's, which really pissed them off.
So what kind of repairs would this be? Is this like return products from your customers?
Yes.
Or is this, okay.
Yeah, it was returns from a customer. Like a lot of so Smith and Nephew was in arthroscopy. So a lot of arthroscopy, you stick the arthroscope in the joint through one hole that you make, say in the knee, and then if the person might have arthritis or a problem with the surface of the bone, the condyle, or a tear in the meniscus, they would go in with a shaver, which is kind of a rotating cutting device, and they would cut and remove suction out tissue. But sometimes they would make a mistake and they would gouge the end of the endoscope with the cutter. And so the endoscope would be damaged and it would have to come back to us for repair.
You're like metal shavings inside the patient then?
Yes, that happens. Yeah. That's why in these devices you have to use past biocompatibility testing. You cannot use anything when you construct these devices that, if a piece of it fell off and ended up in the body, would be toxic or carcinogenic or mutagenic.
Wow. So there's probably a list then of approved materials. You have to make sure it's on the list like that.
There's no master list, but many materials have been. Well, there's no master list by the FDA, but there's many materials that have undergone what's called tripartite testing for all those things that I just mentioned, and have passed that testing before. So that if you use those materials in your product, then when your product is tested itself, you have very high confidence that it will pass.
Okay. So each product is individually tested just like it would be for UL.
That's right. So we might use a certain type of brass. We might use a certain epoxy, a certain type of glass, and all of those things will have been individually tested. And so when you use them in combination, you still have to test them in combination, but you have very high confidence that they'll pass.
Wow. So can you tell us more about, for those of us who are completely unfamiliar with medical regulations for devices, what else is there?
Well, the FDA is responsible for assuring the safety and efficacy of medical devices. So you have to go through a complex process of ensuring safety, and that occurs in every step of the product development process, from project planning through final verification and validation testing at the end. So you have to go through risk mitigation and risk management activities all the way along, and keep a risk management file as part of the design history file for the product, all of which is regulated by the FDA and international standards like ISO 13487. And so you have to make sure that there's no hazards, like that nothing can get too hot on the device when you're using it, that if it involves optics, that you're not exceeding tissue safety ratings for irradiation of tissue, especially if you use a laser. You got to be very careful because lasers can be pinpoint focused, cause tissue damage. You have to be sure there's no chance of electrical shock. If it's a mechanical device, is there a risk of pinching or compressing tissue to a point of damage? So, in every conceivable chemical burn, every conceivable way that a product could damage a user or a patient or a reprocessor, you have to think about it.
Wow. So you mentioned design revision files. How far back does that go? If you're working on a prototype and you haven't engaged with a manufacturer yet, and you're just trying to do a proof of concept, should you be worried about the notes that you're taking at that stage if it's going to be a medical device?
Not so much the notes, but the documentation, the formal documentation. So generally, you start a design history file, DHF, which is defined by this ISO standard. In our process, it's called Phase 2, detailed design work. So in Phase 0, you're defining the product. You are doing the product development planning to figure out how long, how much, and who, and all of that, and how. And then in Phase 1 is proof of concept, and this is where you don't want to be burdened with formal documentation yet. You want to experiment. You want to play with things. You want to very quickly be able to try things, and if that doesn't work, try something different. And if you have to document all of that, it really slows the process down. So in Phase 1, you really are creative. And at the end of Phase 1, you say, okay, I have demonstrated that if we design a project along these lines, and that generally includes defining a few key components then that will work, or we see a path to that working. So at that point, you start the design history file. You define the product that you're going to build. That becomes the product device specification, and then you have to document the entire process of the detailed design of that product, the electrical, mechanical, optical engineering, and figuring out how you're going to test it, how you're going to do the quality management. At some point, you have to consider the human factors engineering. Part of the FDA requirements for device clearance now is you have to submit what they call a HFE report, Human Factors Engineering Report, which is basically demonstrating that you have examined very carefully how this device will be used and that you have eliminated all foreseeable causes of human error with the device. They do the same thing in aviation, a lot, space program obviously, and in medical devices, very, very important. And it came about because of some very famous disasters in using medical devices. There was one in particular, an infusion pump that was killing patients when it was administering pain medication, and a whole bunch of people died with this one brand model of pump. And they did the research, the forensics on figuring out why that was, and it turned out that, it had what's called a segmented display, like you have in an elevator counting up the floors, and it's just the letters are produced in these segments. Well, there was kind of a light shield over the top of this display to make it more readable in room light. The problem was that it could shadow or block the top segment, so that so that you could mistake 7 for a 1.
Oh no!
Because you couldn't see the top bar of the 7.
Oh God!
And so people thought the pain medication was set to 1 when it was set to 7.
Oh goodness!
And that was a foreseeable, discoverable human error. But they did not do what's called the formative and summative testing that would have revealed that error, with users actually interacting with the device before it went to market.
Okay. Is there a certain number of users that it has to be tested on?
Polls for all those things. Typical third, a bit of a magic number. You got to get 30 participants in many kinds of studies to have any kind of statistical validity.
The number's 30? I'm sorry, just
30, 30.
Okay.
30, yeah.
Huh. That's probably good for other things, too. Like,
it is.
1 in 30,
absolutely.
If someone's going to screw it up, there's going to be at least one of them out of 30, probably.
Yeah, it's true. And you also have to do post-launch surveillance as a requirement. If anybody is injured by a device, that has to be reported to the FDA by the manufacturer, and the manufacturer has to do an internal review of that injury to determine root cause. So all of this, has come about in the last 20 years following, some of these high-profile failures of medical devices.
Wow. And aside from the FDA, are there other regulations that a medical device might need to adhere to?
Yes. The biggest one is CE listing. And you have to have a design dossier, they call it, to submit for a CE listing. And that is what you need to sell the device in the EU and many other countries that have adopted the CE mark. Then there's the Chinese FDA, which is actually what it's called. And then a lot of other large countries have their own equivalent of the FDA, like Japan and Australia.
Wow.
So it's one of the first things that you want to ask and you want to define when you're doing product definition. Is this a global product? What regulations do we have to meet? And what will be the rollout strategy? Where will you do your, if the device requires human study or clinical study, in what countries will you do that? Under what regulatory framework? And then in what countries will you first roll out the product? And what's the rollout sequence? So all that really ought to be defined by the marketing group, business development group up front.
Wow. Whew. Sounds very hard. I
Yeah.
understand why a lot of people shy away from, any kind of product that would be for the medical device industry because it's so complicated, which is understandable, but at the same time sad.
Yes, it has all the same challenges of any other manufactured product, plus the regulation, the hazards, the risks of selling a device that can harm people directly, and rapidly evolving technology in medical devices and healthcare and genomics and drugs and everything else that could just make your device obsolete right out of left field.
Right. Wow. When you're talking about all the stuff that you're working on in the 80s, and that was like cutting edge, it almost feels like a lot of that technology hasn't really changed much. I know when I go to the doctor and I see like they're putting up like an MS-DOS program.
Yeah. Right.
Is that my medical record? What do you think?
Yeah, it's in some ways medical device industry is slow to change. Doctors, the older they get, the less new stuff they want to learn in terms of equipment, and so they just want to stick with the stuff, and so the manufacturers end up rolling out, incremental improvements of their equipment, every couple of years, 3 years, and sometimes the novel technologies don't evolve. I heard about the demise of endoscopy going back to I'd say the late 80s, where it was first demonstrated that you could do fly-throughs with MRI and CT. In other words, you could use the software and fly using that kind of imaging technology and not have to stick an endoscope up there.
Oh.
Well, guess what? It's 2021, and that isn't happening still.
Why?
Because you still cannot see in an MRI or a CAT scan during a virtual fly-through what you can see with a high-quality endoscope.
Yeah.
That's it. And what does endoscope mean? It means look inside. That is the purpose of an endoscope.
Yeah.
And so they've gotten better and better. Imaging quality is amazing. And they've added capabilities in endoscopes. For example, doing narrow band imaging so that you can visualize tumor better with the endoscope. You can visualize subsurface vasculature, and nerves now are beginning to be visualized using advanced imaging techniques with endoscopes. So endoscopy's gotten better. Yeah.
I didn't even know that you could see nerves. Like, to me, they were, I don't know, in my mind, they were just, like, so small that it was almost an imaginary thing. And I was just interviewing Julius Mushabek, who worked on medical devices. He's, like, talking about imaging nerves, and I'm like, no way!
Yeah.
It's so crazy.
Yep, it is possible, especially if you use a contrast agent. That is a thing called selective uptake, where certain types of cells will absorb more of a fluorophore, or like a fluorescent compound, than other types of tissue. And there are certain kinds that nerve tissues have an affinity to.
Gosh, that's doubly creepy, though, because then you think about, anything that you're getting into you, if that's making something fluorescent. Like a lot of times it's just tiny amounts that can really change the human body. Like a tiny bit of medication or a tiny bit of something in it. You can use it to, like, it's enough to image your nerves, or it's enough to totally change your physiology. Crazy. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, drugs are developed for that purpose. A fluorophore, it has to, before it can be approved for human use, you have to demonstrate that it does not have any of those effects.
Right. But it's still enough that it's going to attach to different tissues, and it's going to light them up. Temporarily.
Yep. And there's, that's what your kidneys and liver are for. They clear contaminants from your blood, your urine. And so they're very, very good at that. So, yes, is there some residual risk to using a fluorophore? Probably, but I think it's quite small.
So, okay. So let's go back to, you built a new factory, basically, that was doing repairs. You got really great at it, so much that you pissed off Germany, Then what happened?
So then, my business plan that I had written collaboratively with the Germans called for first doing repairs, then doing the production of new endoscopes, and then doing product development, which is what was my ultimate ambition. I didn't want to just run a repair shop or an assembly line. I wanted to develop new products.
That's the fun part.
That's the fun part for me. And so after 4 years, I said, well, it's time. Let's start doing this. And I put I went out and landed some projects.
Oh.
And they said, yeah, thanks. Well, we're going to do those in Germany.
No, they didn't.
They did. And so as a minority shareholder, yeah, it was disappointing. I developed a bad attitude, and as a minority shareholder, I couldn't change it, and so I ended up leaving and doing what I wanted to do, which was product development, and that's when I founded Optimum Technologies in 1994.
Wow. So you're like, whatever, I'll do it myself.
Exactly, and I did. And, in fact, I took one job that I had brought to them that they didn't want to do, and I ended up doing that independently once I left.
Wow.
That was my first project, actually, independent.
Wow. That's wild. So you already had all of the, I guess, training for building a product development company, because you'd already done it in different stages to some degree.
That's
and
right.
You'd already did the sales part by getting those other projects that you weren't able
That's
to
right.
work on out there. And then you took it.
That's right. That's right. Yep. I've done the sales, for a long time already. Yeah. And there's not that many people who form product development companies who have manufacturing experience, I have learned.
Right. Right.
And I think we pitched that very successfully on a number of projects that, and I would hire people later in the company when we really grew it. I would hire people that had manufacturing experience to do product development work because I knew how valuable that was.
Mm-hmm.
So that became a bit of our corporate culture.
That's awesome. Because I see, not just with the project management, but even in the higher levels of organizations where they're trying to build some hardware or a medical device, and the leadership just has no idea, and they make mistakes that would be pretty obvious to you or I, but to them,
right.
They just don't understand that it's the manufacturing product development. It's a totally different world in a lot of different industries.
Totally, and you got to have it in product development, or whoever ends up manufacturing this thing is going to use your name in vain.
Oof.
And I've experienced that by landing a project because the other firm had done such a terrible job and the product wasn't manufacturable, and they asked us to come in and fix it.
Gosh, yeah, I get a lot of those too, and I hate them. I'll take it, but I hate those projects because a lot of the times, other parameters have been nailed down, and you're kind of painted into a corner sometimes, and you can't change.
Yep, sometimes.
Yeah.
That's right. That happens. That does happen.
The earlier you can engage in people who have experience in the thing you're trying to build, the better it is, because you might paint someone into a corner and make them engineer inside of the box that they don't need to be engineering inside, and block other more efficient, more accurate ways of making a thing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So you already had all this experience, but then what was it like when you were building your own thing? What were the steps?
Well, it has its own challenges, of course. For the first 5 years, I just did it as a lifestyle business. I had 2 young children, very young children, and we had a swimming pool, and so I would work mornings, and then I would go out and spend afternoons with my kids, especially before they got into school or when they were in school in the summers. And this is when I got CAD when SolidWorks first came out. I wanted to get CAD, and this was an interesting story. That the big players were Parametric Technologies Corporation, which was PTC. Just I'm forgetting the name of the product for a moment. That was the. I'm sorry.
Didn't that become Pro-E or Creo or something, or maybe?
Pro-E. That's right. Pro-E
Okay.
was their product. And when I started looking for CAD program, they were the hot thing.
Really?
And so I called the rep, and they came to my house. 3 guys in white shirts and ties, and real stuffed shirts. And they looked around, and they sat at my dining room table, and they gave me a cursory presentation of their product, thinking, who's this guy? He's not a customer for us. And barely gave me the time of day. And I called the SolidWorks people, and they said, yeah, we'll come right out. And the guy came out, shirt sleeves, opened up his laptop, basically spent the afternoon with me, taught me the basics of how to use the system.
Mm-hmm.
He said it cost $1,000. I said sold. And that was the very first year they had it out. And so I taught myself how to use that. I taught myself how to use AutoCAD prior to that, which was only 2D. So I started doing, mechanical design on those. Later, I would hire mechanical engineers that were better at it than I was. So I stopped doing that. But I knew how to do it. So, I could manage those guys effectively. And that's a key, the two key lessons there, in terms of suppliers. If you have a copy startup and if you want their attention, go with the beta version if it's working. And number 2, if you're going to be a supervisor, program manager, leader, know how to do what your subordinates are doing.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I know other companies don't run their companies that way, but I think it's super important, especially when you are, that engineer who's stuck and you're up against a crazy timeline and, something went wrong that maybe wasn't your fault and now you have very little time to fix it and then your boss can't do anything to help you. They're just like, you fixing it? That's
right. It does suck.
But when you started your company, though, tell me what that looked like. You said you're getting to spend time with your kids, and it's just like you're doing what you want for fun from where you want. But did you have employees? Did you have a lab? Did you have what does it look like?
Okay, so I took over the basement of the house, which was a pretty big basement, and I had an office and lab in one half, and then I set up makerspace in the other half.
Whoa.
So I could build things out of wood, plastic, and a little bit of metal. I had a small lathe and a milling machine, and some other things I could do. A little bit of metal fabrication. I started building out my vendor base, machine shops, optical fabricators, optical coating companies, all the suppliers that I would need. And I started building out my virtual team. So I would find subcontractors that were independent in all the disciplines, and I would start doing projects with virtual teams. That was the model for my business from the start.
Mm-hmm. So how many people would be on these teams, maybe in the beginning?
It was usually just a few at that point. 3-4 people would be typical.
Yeah.
An OE, an ME, maybe a specialist in electronics or some aspect of electronics or optics that I was not familiar with, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you're doing full development design?
We were doing full product development, and we did some wacky things. We would take on almost anything at that point. And I had a creative bunch that we could prosper. But as time went on, I realized that we really did better if we narrowed our offering.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became optical systems mostly, electro-optical, optomechanical systems, but in all the markets, government, and I never did military because I just don't believe in working for a military complex. But we worked for other government entities, other commercial sectors, automotive, aviation, consumer. But then I realized that we brought the most value add and could make the best margins in medical. And so,
Okay.
maybe 5 years in or 4 years in, the focus really narrowed down to optical medical devices or optical life science devices.
I see. So before you go on to the progression of your amazing company, I know a lot of people who are interested in going freelance as engineers or who are already out there in that pool and trying to figure out how to make it. I think that they would get a lot out of hearing about you in these beginning stages of your company, because it was basically you're a freelancer and you work with other freelancers in some regard.
That's right. That's
so
right.
How did you find those people, and how did you find the contracts, your clients? What was that part? Those are the hardest things right there.
Yep. One thing that another lesson I've learned along the way is, in any position that you have, you build up a network of acquaintances, customers, suppliers, employees, ex-employees, and so forth. A lot competitors, and when you leave that position, that network remains fresh for about 18 months.
Huh.
And if you don't use it and nurture it, water it, fertilize it, it goes stale.
Yeah.
And so I would make sure that I kept those networks alive. I did that when I went from Smith & Nephew to Henke, and when I went from Henke to Independent. And so I'd call people. One thing I mentioned before, I would set aside every Friday afternoon, no matter how busy I was, to do sales and marketing activities, and that was part of what I did. I bought a contact relationship CRM, contact relationship management software. I used ACT. Other people have used, Gold Mine, whatever it is. Others, There's others out there, but that became a very important tool. Actively using a CRM, because otherwise it is impossible to track all your prospects and people that you've contacted, people you say, I'm not ready, but call me in a month. You need a CRM to do that and to do your sales and marketing. I use the same database for all of my human resources, all of my subcontractors, and all of my customers. So I could link them all together.
Nice.
I would do mailings. I started writing newsletters. What's happening in optics kind of thing, And when Google first introduced AdWords, I was there. And I had promote click-through campaigns, they call them. Maybe they still call them that. Back then, you could get a word like optical for a dime per click. That was the starting rate. I have no idea what that would cost now. Tens of dollars probably. So I used that, and that was a successful campaign until it got too expensive. I built a website. I went to trade shows. I would walk trade shows where a lot of our customers were. Those going all the way back to my very first job when we were making fiber optic illuminators for all those companies I mentioned. They were at these trade shows, and I would go and visit them. And I wasn't the guy that they wanted to see at the show because I wasn't a potential customer. But I would say, is your VP of engineering here today, or your CTO? And often he was. They're almost always he's then. And so I would, I'd get his card, or they'd say, come back in a half hour, and I'd talk to that guy and give him my card, and that led to business. Especially when I could say, I was built your bigger illuminators back in the day. So that was all those things were all important to getting business. Response, very important. I got a call from a company in Florida. They found us on the web, and they had this complex project that they wanted us to take on, ophthalmic instrument. And I said, so who else is bidding on it? He said, well, IBM, their consulting services group, and IDEO, which is like the premier design company in the country. They worked with Steve Jobs and all the early Apple products. And, I said, wow, that is some stiff competition. So the guy, so I said, can I come see you tomorrow? He said, yeah. So I got on a plane. And I went to Florida the next day, and I met his team, and I demonstrated that we do how to do what they wanted to do with my presentation that I had and bios of my people and sample products. And I flew home. 2 days later, he had a proposal, and he accepted our proposal. And in the meantime, he had not even gotten a return phone call from the other two groups.
This is such a great story, especially for the people listening who are thinking about building their own business. I mean, you put so much effort and time and money into marketing and sales, and that plane trip that you took, you paid for that, right? And that wasn't...
Oh, yeah, out of pocket. Sure.
Yeah. So you're spending a lot of money every year, every week. You're setting aside a regimented amount of time. You are actively going after clients. I mean, how do you think that would have gone down if you just were emailing back and forth with that client versus going out there and taking the actual physical trip?
Hard to know. I mean, IBM has like 5,000 engineers in their engineering consulting services group. Mm-hmm. So, they have, there's so much gunpowder. There's no way we could outgun them. But they're probably expensive and they're slow. And they're not always the best match. And same with IDO. They're, nowadays they're arrogant SOBs and, they're not for everybody, that's for sure.
So that's interesting. So in a way, like this extra effort that you're making to connect with your prospective clients is an edge. It's not just sales tactic.
Yes.
It's how you get ahead over companies that are much more, established.
Absolutely.
And have a bigger
Absolutely.
budget. Awesome.
Being nimble. Nimbleness is one of the startup's greatest attributes.
But also the personal connection that you're making, and that just so much effort.
Yes. Yep. You have to keep up with it. I have that same database today that I started in, I think, 1994, and I still use it.
Wow. That's amazing. So how did you get clients? You went after them. How did you find other people to work with? They were people you worked with previously, and you kept up with these past connections who would then become your coworkers and clients and subordinates.
That's right. Yep, keep up with people. When LinkedIn came around, I jumped on that and built up a big LinkedIn community. I never used Facebook for business and never wanted to, but I was an early adopter at LinkedIn, used that for marketing as well. So it's really keeping up with network. Going to all kinds of meetings. In Massachusetts, we have Mass Medic, which is medical industry advocacy group. They advocate for medical interests in Washington, but they also had monthly fora where people in the device industry would get together and learn about, what Mass Medic is doing, or they'd have somebody in talking about intellectual property or product development or all kinds of things. And I would meet all kinds of people, and I'd press the flesh and give out the cards. And go home and put them in my database and send them an email in a week and that sort of thing. There's another one called Medical Development Group, and it's another medical device group in Massachusetts, and they have all kinds of programming. And I was an early sponsor there. I was a platinum sponsor for like 12 years, so I got to be a program moderator, and I would actually put programs together. And once a year, because I was the platinum sponsor, they would let me put together a program kind of focused on stuff I knew about, endoscopes or imaging or optical sensors or things like that. And so I established myself as a well-known expert in optical medical devices in a very wide audience.
Awesome.
I would occasionally write pieces for like Optical Design World or Laser Focus World, Penwell and Lauren Publishing.
Yeah, establishing yourself as a authority on a subject that you're trying to work. Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome.
That's the authority establishment phase.
So
once I felt like that was done, that was not really worth my effort anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You've already made it. I'm just gonna coast then after that. Nice.
Yeah, and there were better ways for me to stay top of mind with people.
Huh. So you get these first few projects. You're working in a team of freelancers. What was the next stage of your company after that?
After 5 years of this being more of a lifestyle business, I was getting antsy again. So I decided I wanted to step it up. And, I could have like 2 collaborators working with me at my basement offices. But after that, it was not very practical. So I found a building in Southbridge where Henke was, and I was living in Sturbridge, the next town over. And I took out a second mortgage against my house, and I bought this building. And
oh my gosh, big risk.
Yep, renovated it, transferred all the stuff out of my basement over there, set up a better machine shop for working.
Clean. All this was from the second mortgage for your house? You didn't have investors? You didn't have...
No, I always bootstrapped. I do not like debt.
Yeah.
And after my experience at Henke, I vowed never to be a minority partner again.
Yeah, good advice. Were you scared at all, or were you pretty confident that this was going to grow and it would be a good investment?
I was confident. I always knew that, the money that I spent buying the building and renovating the building would be durable, and I could always sell the building, maybe at somewhat of a loss, but not for the whole thing, of course. And I guess I had enough projects that, they continued to come in. My wife at the time was very nervous about it, but she had faith in me, so she accepted it, and we never looked back. And as soon as I got in that building, I started hiring people. I had enough business that I could start slowly hiring people, and I think one of the first full-time guy that I hired, kind of a funny story, talked about, you always got to be aware, keep your eyes open. And I always went to this one gas station around the corner from my building, and I was always impressed with how well it was maintained. The curbs were freshly painted, and the garage door was open. You look in, everything in its place, everything's spick and span, the floors are gleaming. The guy that comes out is in a fresh, clean uniform, and so I started checking my car there. I said, anybody that keeps their business that neat and orderly, they're going to do a good job working on my car. And they did. And so I got to know the guy, Jeff. And so one day I advertised in the local paper for a mechanical engineer, and next time I was in getting gas, he said, hey, you've known me here from the gas station for years now, but what you don't know is I'm a mechanical engineer, and I'm interested in your position.
Huh.
And he had a leg up right off the bat because I already knew how he worked, the quality of what he did, right? So I hired him, and he was a great hire. And his former mechanical engineering experience was at Smith & Wesson. So always used to joke. In his prior job, we put holes in people. In this job, we fix them.
So you gotta create your own business.
That's right.
Create the market need. Oh my gosh.
That's right.
That's so funny. Wow. So he was like on a hiatus then from engineering work, or was he still doing stuff on the side?
He was. It was a family situation. It was his father owned the gas station, the service station, and he needed help.
Oh wow.
So he was helping out his dad, but after a few years of that, he said, Dad, I want to get back to engineering.
Oh wow. That's awesome. What a great story.
Yeah. And I managed to keep him, I think, for 5 years until Storts lured him away. That competitor that I mentioned earlier.
Huh.
And, I couldn't match what they were offering. So, and he's still there, and I just saw him the other day because his wife, and we were all friends back then, had kids about the same age, his wife is now a tenant in the incubator that I'm running.
Oh, wow. It all comes full circle.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yep. He's still at Storts, and he said, I continue to thank you for giving me my entree into the medical device world, because I don't know that I ever would have been here if you hadn't done that. So that made me feel good.
Aw, that's so nice.
Yeah.
So then how did you find all the other people? Were they...
I would advertise.
Mechanical engineers you can get.
Yeah. I would advertise, I would network, I would go to all those meetings that I talked about, and you got to tell everybody, hey, I'm looking for an ME, you know anybody? And you got to, get it out there. That was long enough ago. There were still newspaper ads, local and regional.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever hired anybody through an ad, but maybe I did.
That's a key point that I want people to hear.
Yeah. Nowadays, forget about it.
Yeah.
In print, I would never advertise in print again.
So,
so I would, using all those methods, I would hire people till, we got up to about, I think, 10 people, and everything was going well. Sometimes we, looks like, this project is ending, and I'm not sure what we're going to do next. And I would just tell myself, you know what? The project always comes in. You got to have faith, truly. And that has been true ever since.
But they didn't just magically come in, right? How are you getting
those
contracts once you built bigger?
All of these contacts, every time you contact somebody and talk about your business and remind them who you are and what you do, you plant a seed. And if you're in sales and marketing, you're a farmer. Your job is to get those seeds to sprout.
Yes.
And so I just kept doing what I was doing, and yes, one contractor then, and literally one day I lost a big contract that I was expecting, and that same morning someone called me up out of the blue, and that led to a contract of equal size.
Wow.
So that happened enough times that I just had faith that it was always going to happen. And that being said, then 2001 happened. With the attacks, the terrorist attacks.
Yeah. And the dot-com bubble at the same time.
And the dot-com bubble. And so I was busy, from September 11 to maybe the following January, and then the bottom dropped out. And 2001 was the worst year that I ever had. The fallout of 2001 was the worst I ever had. By the end of the year, I went from 10 people to 2.5 because the projects were not coming in. That was the only time where I could not sustain beyond 2.5 people. And one of those was a half-time sales guy.
Your mantra of it's just gonna always come in, stop being valid. Who were you thinking at that point?
I was thinking that we would get back to that.
Oh, okay. This
that
is a
my
temporary.
Would be justified again. Yeah, and it was temporary. It took, it took 10 years for the country to fully rebound, and it took a few years for me to get back to having, I think, 5, 6, 8 people.
Did you change up your marketing and sales tactics at all in that time?
I continued to refine my focus. Over the years, we just got more and more refined in our messaging. And we spent a lot of time on search engine optimization. We, did our website over like 3 times. I did a complete rebranding in 2008 or 9. New logo, new tagline, all new collateral, new presentation, all new trade show booths. I forgot the trade shows. All focused on, optical devices for the life sciences. And we went to MD&M every year, medical design and manufacturing. And that was an expensive show, but we did that from 2005 through maybe 2016, something like that. And that's another one where I'm not sure that I could draw a straight line between somebody that I met at that show and an actual project. But it's the kind of thing, you kind of had to be there because all our competitors were there, and every time you hand out a card, you're planting a seed.
I met you at MDN.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
And here we are. Have I gotten, any paid work from you? Yeah, I did, actually. I think a little project from you. That's right.
Yeah.
All right. So there's one straight line. I forgot about that one.
And actually, you gave me work, too, at the same time. That worked
nice. Yeah. Right. Right.
You also dragged me back into optical engineering land, which I was trying to flee from. It was awesome to you.
Oh, no. She's going to blame me.
Absolutely. it's been an interesting ride. So I'm very thankful that I met you that day. It was quite serendipitous.
Well, it was, and I'm glad that you demonstrated that you can throw yourself at a project with, great vigor, and that's to your credit.
I guess that's what counts the most, the vigor part. Keep, just like with entrepreneurship and business and engineering and manufacturing, just keep going at it.
Purposefacity. You know that word?
No.
That's a $20 word. You got to learn that one. Purposefacity.
Oh,
Persistence.
Is it real? Is that a real word?
Yeah, purposefacity.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. I always learn
and grit.
something from you.
That's good. Yeah. You just gotta. Sometimes you just gotta keep plugging, and there's just no substitute for it.
Yeah. So you kept plugging, and
I did.
Your company grew. It rebounded.
It did.
Quite a bit.
Yes. So when 2008 was when the economy really was taking off again, and that we started getting really busy. And there's another bit of a downturn in 2000. There was actually a recession in 2008. There was another one in 2010.
Oh, I remember.
But we didn't. Yeah. But we didn't really feel those so much.
I guess
our
medical
sector
was a bit separate.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. We're separate, and so we were steady. And then we were by 2012. We were just bursting at the seams. We had too many people in the building. We only had 3,000 square feet. Yeah. Well, for that building, and that's another adage that you'll hear from CEOs is never rent more space unless you've been just bursting at the seams for at least a year.
Okay.
And so I did that, and I said, okay, we've lived uncomfortably now for a year. It's time to get more space.
Just think of that office space scene where the guy's like in the basement.
Yeah, right. You got somebody sitting on top of the file cabinet, on his laptop. So yeah, we got to that point, right? And so I started looking around for buildings in town. I wanted to stay local, and I wanted to get something nice because I had some savings at that point, paid off the second mortgage, and so I found this building that the town was selling, an old school, and it was actually being auctioned. And so I put in a bid, and it was a high bid, but it was rejected on a technicality. So 6 months later, yeah, that's how it works. When a public entity is auctioning something, they have to go strictly by the rules. And so I understood that. But then it came up, they put it back on the auction 6 months later, and I got it for less than what I'd offered the first time.
Ha ha.
So, because I knew nobody bid as high as I did the first time, so I bid lower. And so at any rate, I got the building, spent the next 4 months renovating it, and we moved in.
Well, you're still running a company already in the other facility.
Yeah.
That's a lot to manage. Okay.
It was, but I had very good managers at that point on board. I had an excellent team by that point, and I didn't need to have my finger in everything. So I managed the design and the build out. And so we occupied that in late 2013, and then we just kept growing, and I guess it was 2013. I guess it was 2013 where we landed the biggest project that we'd ever have. It was a 4-year project, and we had to hire more people for it, and also team up with a number of other service providers. We teamed up with a software company, with a human factors design company, and an electronics design company. And so we were the prime contractor. They were all subcontractors. So all their billing went through us, and we had 60 people on the project at its peak in the various companies.
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah.
You went from Freelancer to gigantic R&D. Like, I've worked at large corporations that didn't have that many technical people in the building. Yeah.
It was a big team. We actually had 3 managers on that program to keep it all on track.
Wow.
And then the subcontractors had their own managers. So we were 3 years into that program, and we were negotiating the terms for the final year when they announced, we're bringing it in-house. We're not renewing your contract. And fortunately, I had negotiated very good wind down terms. So we had 3 months where they had to pretty much, keep us going at the same level, while we wound down and people, found jobs and so forth. So it was a soft landing.
Where did the wisdom come from to do that? Were you burned in the past on prior projects that were
I have definitely had customers abruptly withdraw. And these guys, this was such a big project and they were so demanding that they wanted us to do more and more, that we didn't, that discipline of going out and getting other business, fell through. And so we had like no other business at the time. There was a lot in the pipeline. Well, we couldn't. And so that's why, right. We were to the brim and it was a challenge for us to manage it as it was. And so we didn't look for new projects. We were always responding to inquiries and, keeping those seeds alive. But, when this happened abruptly, we did not have the replacement business on hand. And so I had a choice. I had, a few years before, I had drafted my 5-year exit strategy. And so I was most of the way there. I'd already actually made enough money to retire at this point. This contract was just hugely profitable. And so I said, I can try and keep my team together and go out and scramble for more new business, or I can take my ball and go home. And I decided to go home. And so I helped everybody when I could get jobs, and everybody did get employment very quickly.
Nice.
But then the phone kept ringing, and projects did come in. So, I kept a couple of guys on for those projects, and I kept going, and that's continued until I decided, I'm not using enough of this building. And that's when I said, I have all this equipment and furnishings and benches and conference rooms in place. I said, I want to find a use for this. I'm going to make it an incubator. And so that's when I did that. And this
what year was that?
January. Yeah, that was 2 years ago, a little over two and a quarter years ago is when I officially launched the incubator. And as of January 1 this year, it was profitable.
Wow.
So
that's great.
That worked out. Yeah.
Who's in there right now?
So I have 7 tenants, including myself in there right now. They're all life science oriented except for one. And one guy is, he is plastics engineer, PhD plastics engineer with expertise in plastic extrusion. And so he extrudes biocompatible plastics that are infused with pharmaceuticals. And these get implanted under the skin or in the prostate, and they elute the pharmaceutical for up to a couple of years. And these are on the market already for like birth control delivery. You can have one of these little capsules delivered, under your skin and your back of your arm, and you have to remember to take your birth control pill every day.
Wow.
There's another company that is doing FTIR spectroscopy of excised tissue samples to customize chemotherapy regimens. Another company is doing CBD products, riding the CBD wave. So they are a packager. So they buy CBD and all other kinds of ingredients, and they make lotions and oils and edible things and all kinds of stuff. Package them for their customers. They're moving out, which is good. They're graduating because I have another guy ready to take their space. Nice. This is, our tagline for the incubator is your bridge to launch, and that's exactly what we were for the CBD guys. They are now renovating a 20,000 square foot building in Southbridge, and that's their next step.
Oh, your babies are leaving the nest. That's great.
Yeah, well, I'm glad these guys are. That's success. And the guy that's moving in, and one of my other tenants who does, they do very sophisticated testing of plants for disease and genetics. So they're a testing lab. Yeah. And he's going to occupy the space that the CBD guys currently occupy. I got another guy who is actually developing extraction techniques for things like CBD and other plant-derived nutraceuticals.
Huh.
So, yeah.
Wow.
And I have another guy who's doing, it's called non-viral cellular transfection. How's that for a mouthful? Which is, people may have heard about viral, what they call viral vectors. Some of these COVID vaccines and many other types of vaccines use viruses to deliver a payload to the target cells. The virus has been inactivated, but it's still capable of carrying a payload inside of cells, particularly T-cell technology, T-cell immunology. So, T cells are one of your immune cells. They attack foreign cells, and you have to get T cells to attack the virus, for example, or cancer. And so, where they do this is they have to get the DNA from the target cancer cell inside the T cell, so the T cells recognize the cancer cells. And so they attach this genetic material to the virus. The virus has a unique capability of being able to tunnel its way through cell walls and deliver the DNA payload to the nucleus inside the cell, the T cell. Wow. The T cell then starts expressing that genetic material, which causes and then replicating itself and going after the cancer cells.
Oh wow, that's
okay.
Wild.
It is, but there's lots of issues with what's called the viral vector, using viruses to get this DNA inside T cells. And this tenant of mine has developed a way where you withdraw blood from a patient, you separate the blood in a centrifuge, you skim out that layer that contains the T cells, you pass those cells through his tabletop instrument, and they come out the other side transfected with this DNA that he wants in the T cells.
Whoa, that's some sci-fi stuff right there.
That is, and this could be huge. Any major medical center could have one of these instruments on the table in their lab, and they could culture cells from their own cancer patients and then take the T cells out of those same patients and program T cells to attack that very cancer.
Wow, that's weird. And that's happening right in your incubator.
Right in our incubator.
Wow.
That's right. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is cool stuff.
So you've got a lot of equipment over there. Are they all able to use that equipment? How does that work?
Not so much. Not so much. My building was optimized for device development. These guys are really more life sciences than medical device. I mean, I consider medical device under the life science umbrella, but the way life science people use the term, it's really pharma and biotech.
Yeah.
And so they're more nutraceuticals, pharma, biotech.
So the equipment that you have there, is that just for your own, I
use it. Yep, I still have my optics lab set up, and I have a complete electronics lab. All that's in storage at the moment. The machine shop is set up, and people do use that occasionally. I still use it.
Cool. I wanted to go over some specific projects that you did in your company to give people more of an idea of the stuff that you personally had a hand in developing from scratch. Yeah. Can you give us some examples?
One device I can tell you about is called the video laryngoscope. This is a device for placing a breathing tube through the vocal cords into the trachea. So when you have anesthesia, you not sedated, but anesthesia, you are paralyzed, so you have to go on a ventilator, which means they need to put an endotracheal tube through your vocal cords to your trachea to connect it to the ventilator, breathing machine. The problem is that it's sometimes difficult to place that tube. And if you recall from your anatomy, there's a Y between your bronchus and your trachea. And, between the esophagus and the trachea. And you've got to be sure that the tube goes in the trachea and not the esophagus, or you'll just be pumping air into the stomach instead of into the lungs. Patient dies. And so normally you use what looks like a huge tongue depressor, curved tongue depressor, to push the tongue out of the way so that you can see the vocal cords and place the tube there. However, it doesn't always work according to plan. So sometimes it becomes what you call a difficult intubation, and you can't see the vocal cords, and you can't get the tube in, and it can become a crisis at that point because the patient is already anesthetized. And so this device has this curved tongue depressor part that pushes the tongue out of the way, but at the end of that is an LED for illumination and a video camera.
Whoa.
So you can visualize the vocal cords from down inside the throat.
Huh. That's gotta look wild. So like a horn with an LED and a camera on it.
Sort of. Yeah, it's a curved tongue depressor, if you will.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so that was an interesting project because it was done for an airway management company, which means they made endotracheal tubes and breathing bags and all kinds of things for airway management. So they knew how to do every imaginable thing with plastic, but they had never done an electronics product before.
Oh.
And this involves video and illumination and all kinds of things. So
totally different world of product development.
Right. So we had to take them through the whole process, and fortunately, the project leader on their side was a very nice guy, very reasonable, accepted that he didn't know a lot of what he needed to know, and let us take him through the process. It worked well. And it was about an 18-month process. What took the longest actually was getting the ergonomics right. The handle and the display and the shape of the blade and to make it manufacturable as a disposable. Part of it had to be disposable, and part of it was reusable. And so we partnered up with a design firm to do the ergonomics and the human factors engineering, and that was a great collaboration. And so this product was introduced at MD&M several years later. Well, not several years, after we were done launching it. They were done launching it, and it actually took the Gold Award at the MDEA Awards. So we were proud of that. And in fact, on the basis of that product, their company was so that was a very successful program.
Oh, your phone just cut out. The company was acquired? Is that what you said?
Yeah, based on the basis of that product, the company was acquired.
Nice. Did you say you're welcome?
No, it didn't turn out like that.
Okay.
You talk about all the reasons why you don't get the next project, and even they agreed we did agree. They hired in a new VP of product development, and he didn't want to outsource anything. He wanted to do everything in-house, and he would lie to us and tell us there's no projects, and he thought he was doing all these projects. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, we found that out. So so all that kind of crap happens. But so let's see, another project that we did was the last project that we did, which was next generation intravascular imaging system. And what?
Inside the veins?
Inside of blood vessels. That's right, intravascular. So now the problem in intravascular is the blood. Blood is highly scattering. And so you really can't do optical imaging through blood.
Take it out
and
get rid of it.
Well, and there have been cases where you can actually clear a blood vessel of blood temporarily in order to do some visualization in the optical regime.
So you're trying to actually image the blood vessel itself? That's the point?
Right. We're trying to examine the blood vessel for things like atherosclerosis, hardening of the blood of the veins and arteries, and deposits of plaque. And so the way that the intravascular imaging has generally been done is called IVUS, intravascular ultrasound. And Boston Scientific is very big in that product line. Then the second technology, so that involves a very small catheter, 1 millimeter diameter.
Wow.
Inside of it is a rotating, spinning ultrasonic transducer, very small piece of piezo crystal that's being oscillated with an RF oscillator, and it's sending out ultrasound waves as it rotates. And you get, and then that same transducer receives the echoes and sends it back up to a processor, and you can construct an image of the
Wow.
interior of the blood vessel. And you can do a fly-through. You can splay it open like a butterfly view to look at it, all in software.
Wow.
Okay, so ultrasound is good, but it's because it's sound waves. The resolution is not anywhere near what you can get with optical.
Yeah.
And so people invented OCT, Optical Coherence Tomography, which is very similar. It's the optical analog of what I just described in ultrasound.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a spinning optical fiber with a prism on the end and a lens, and it spins around, and you fire off a laser, pulse a laser, and the laser goes out and reflects off the tissue and comes back, and you're modulating that not only in three axes: radial, axial, and longitudinal. So, kind of modified polar coordinate system. And same thing with a computer now. You can take that reflected light that falls on a detector, and you can build an image in the near infrared.
Gosh,
and
how do you build
much higher
on
resolution.
that scale that are optics? That's not.
That was the challenge. We had to build a catheter that was 1 millimeter in diameter that had both IVUS and OCT in it.
What? So wait, how did because you just mentioned blood being in there is an issue, how did the optics part of that work then?
It worked inside of a balloon. So you would thread this catheter into the artery. You would then inflate the balloon. That would create an airspace, and you do your imaging through the ball of the balloon.
Oh. Neat.
Yeah. And so
so much stuff to cram in there.
That's right. And to be honest, we actually didn't do the catheter for that particular project. We did everything but the catheter for that project, the whole console. But we did a very similar catheter immediately after that for another client. And that's where we had to do basically the same thing. And that pushed the boundaries tiny for what I had ever done. These ultrasonic transducers were 200 microns on a side, and we had to attach wires to those and get the wires all the way out through the catheter. And attach a ball lens to the end of a fiber, and then put a facet on that ball and put a reflective coating on the facet, so we could look out sideways with the optical fiber. So that was a really challenging program. But the main program that really was building this console, and it had to have all the mechanics for doing this catheter insertion, a device that would rotate the catheter and pull it back at a prescribed rate while it's being spun to capture the helical image. The whole OCT engine inside, which is basically a fiber optic interferometer, and then massive computing power to process those two image trains and display them on the screen live. It was about 500,000 lines of code that had to be developed from scratch to do all that.
Wow, that's amazing. As you're describing these devices, it made me think how you get to play with develop a lot cooler technology than a lot of us who just do normal product development do. That would be like a consumer electronic or something for other sort of high volume manufacturing, because you can never build something for the masses that's cheap enough and still use the technology that you're playing with. So you get to do wild stuff. Yep,
it's very cool. But sometimes the challenge is at the other end. For example, we did contributed to a project involving a dental intra-oral scanner.
What?
So if you've had this done, it's a camera that goes in your mouth, and he moves it all around your teeth and gums, kind of like you would move an electric toothbrush. And all the while, it's capturing images at 30 frames per second, and it's building a 3D model of your teeth and gums. Yeah.
Wow.
All with micron accuracy, super accurate.
What?
And and so you can now take that 3D model and send it straight to the back room of this advanced dental practice, and he has a machine that will print a temporary bridge, exactly fits where it needs to fit, and then also he has a little CNC machine where he can actually machine permanent porcelain implants.
Wow.
Okay, so that's what the whole thing does. But and we helped with the optics for that, and it uses interferometry to do that imaging at a very high resolution.
Wow.
But there needs to be a disposable. Everybody wants a disposable, and there was reason for one here. It was a sterile barrier between this wand and the patient. And it's a plastic sleeve that fits over the end of the wand, and then a mirror that directs the view at a right angle, and a little heater behind the mirror so it doesn't fog up when the patient breathes on it.
Oh my gosh.
This has to be an interferometry grade mirror, which means extremely flat. And they want to be able to sell it to the dentist for 50 cents.
What?
Which means they need to be able to manufacture it for 17 cents. That's a typical margin that you want. You want about 3 times in medical devices and dental. If you're going to sell something for 50 cents, you want to make it for 17 cents. And we got damn close to doing that.
Really?
And and it was all about design for manufacture. We had to figure out how to manufacture it as we designed it. And so that's where the our manufacturing experience really came in. And we had, I had manufactured mirrors before, but never when it has to cost 2 cents.
Yeah.
I've done injection molding before, but not when it's true, when it has to cost a few cents, I've done that. And then the heater circuit, little polyester circuit with a carbon patch on it. And it had to be assembled, and make the electrical interconnects and all of that. So, but we figured out, how to do it. It all came down to getting the labor out. So we designed a semi-automated fixture where the parts, you could just load the parts on it very quickly, zap it with a curing light, and then instantly test it, all on that one fixture. And so that got the labor content down to about 10 seconds, which is what it needed to be to do this semi-automated.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else you can tell us about that you actually are under NDA? You made it out in the world?
Let's see.
You've done so many things, so.
We have.
There was one you told me about at the show where you were like scanning blood vessels through some sort of spectroscopy through a finger, I think.
Yes. I can't talk about that one.
Okay.
But I will talk about one that's also on our website. And I'm going to have to get off in a few minutes here. Okay. It's another ophthalmic instrument, and it was a whole new category of instrument called a tear film analyzer. And there's people who have dry eye syndrome, sometimes have it because of what's called meibomian deficiency. Meibomian glands are in your eyelids, and they secrete oils. Every time you blink, your eyelids come together, and that's supposed to push just a little bit of oil out of your meibomian glands, and your eyelids smear that across the aqueous layer that's on your cornea.
Whoa. And
the oil layer, the lipid layer, lubricates your eyelids, and it keeps the aqueous layer from evaporating too quickly.
I had no idea. Okay.
So something like 20 million Americans, mostly postmenopausal women, suffer from dry eye syndrome, and it's very irritating. It's scratchy, itchy. You constantly have to be putting eye drops in. So these guys came up with an instrument that basically it very gently massages the meibomian glands on a daily basis to rid them of the crud that blocks them.
Whoa.
But then they realized they needed a device that would quantify the efficacy, here we are again, efficacy, safety and efficacy of the device. They would never get reimbursement for the cost from the insurance companies unless somebody recognizes the efficacy of the therapy. And so they needed an optical device that would show that the tear film was improving. So they had been working on this for several years already when we got involved, with the inventor is this lovely optometrist. He was about 80 years old when I was working on this, still practicing, lovely man. And he had some old friend of his, ex-Polaroid optical PhD working on it, and PhD couldn't do it. And so we came out and said, we think we know how to do this. We pitched it, and he, and the PhD poo-pooed it, said, nah, you can't do it, nah, you can't do it. But the CEO listened to us, and a year later, we had the PhD back to see our prototype working, and to his credit, he said, damn, you got 3 PhD theses in here. So we were very happy about that.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay.
It was.
I know you're getting close to where you're going. So,
I am.
Can you tell us real quick, if someone booked an appointment with you, what kinds of things that you could help them out with in an hour? I know you can talk about so many things from so many different sides, especially product development of medical stuff, the whole regulatory part, the actual designing, building your design plans from the start, and finding maybe holes.
Yes, I think the value that I would bring is totally dependent on the stage that they are at in their project and in their understanding of the product development process. If somebody is very early in a medical device development effort, the conceptual stage, then I think the best thing we would bring would be big picture expertise. Okay, so this is what you want to do. All right, so you're probably talking that's a $5 to $10 million budget, and figure 3 years to get that to FDA release. And here's the major pitfalls that you're going to have to look out for. Have you thought about this other technology that's being used for this now, or is on the horizon for this competitive technology? What's your IP position? How are you going to fund this? How are you going to live when the company is still pre-revenue? Is this really what you want to be doing for the next 3 years? And so forth. Yeah.
And if someone's already starting to develop something and it falls into a medical optical device, can you provide some guidance there?
Yeah. And we can obviously get more specific with approach and perhaps the best way to tackle the whole design effort. Maybe some tips on IP that they might want to develop. And we don't necessarily limit ourselves to only optical. We do some other medical device stuff in general. So I'm also interested in that.
Awesome. Well, I don't think anyone's going to find a better person to give them guidance that understands both the actual medical device development part and what it's like to start up a business and the whole business side of it at the same time. You have an amazing perspective. So thanks for bringing that over to Odd Engineer for People.
Well, I'm glad to be able to make use of it.
And thanks so much for your time today. It was so fun talking about you and hearing about your background.